Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Muhorter. I'm the executive director for Boston Singers Resource. Thank you all for, taking this time and Saturday to attend this really cool and unique masterclass that we've first time we've ever offered something like this, and we're really excited to see how much how much interest was in this topic. Clearly, as we have like over 20 people in this Zoom room. For those of you who are regular members of Boston Singers Resource, welcome back. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. There's a lot of exciting things going on in Boston Singers Resource, and I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple of upcoming things because there might be of some interest to you. So we have a workshop next Saturday, actually, in Somerville Music Spaces for lyric Italian diction. Really useful and really fun masterclass that we're coming up with that. And a few weeks after that, we'll have on March 16th a No Stress Studio, which is always really popular and a great chance for you to try out some new repertoire that you're trying out, or maybe you have an audition coming up and you want to get a chance to sing through with a pianist in a very low stakes environment. Bring your PJs if you want. And then on March 22nd, we're having our first community conversations session where singers can come together and talk about things going on in the vocal community. That's going to be on Zoom. So it's another nice, cozy opportunity for you to just kind of connect with colleagues and talk about the field. And then our most exciting program coming up this year is our artist in residency with Aaron Morley on April 4th and April 5th. April 4th is going to be a masterclass at Boston Conservatory at 5 p.m. with Aaron Morley. All BSR members are eligible to sign up and participate in that masterclass. We'll be choosing 6 people. Try to fill that form in soon as we're gonna choose our singers on March 1st. And then on April 5th at the Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra Performance Center at 7 p.m. is going to be Aaron Morley's recital. It's going to be a really great weekend, lots of great music. We're really excited about the program Aaron's bringing. You can find all of this information on our website. You can feel free to email Brennan and I if you have any questions. And we hope to see you at some of these upcoming events. And I'll let Brendan introduce our guest and get started on this great workshop.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. So my name is Brendan Shapiro. For those who don't know me, I'm the artistic director of Boston Singers Resource, and it's so great to have you all here. It's super exciting to get such a full crowd for this and see so much interest in singing for video games. I feel like sometimes genre can be put up a little bit of a wall, and so we don't always necessarily explore all of the things our voices can do. So I'm really excited to kind of break that down a little bit today and see how we can all get involved in the video game music industry. It's long been a dream of mine to bring my friend Laura Intravia in to do this kind of workshop. So thank you so much to Laura for being here. And before I turn it over to her, I just want to quickly introduce her and give a brief intro. So Laura Intravia is a multi-talented musician. She's a singer, instrumentalist, arranger, and composer. Let me just let this other person in here. And she's known for a multifaceted career in opera, concert music, and video game and film soundtracks. Her works as a remote session musician have appeared in over 80 video game, TV, and film soundtracks, including Destiny 2, Star Wars Outlaws, and the Mortal Kombat series. She has also performed with 40 orchestras worldwide with an international concert tours, including Video Games Live and Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions, and many others. She's also a core ensemble member of the video game funk fusion band Disco Cactus, and I highly recommend you check them out. Very, very cool. So let me turn it over to Laura. I think we're ready. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Laura Intravia.
Thank you. Thank you for the virtual applause. And let me get the screen share going. I made a slide presentation for our adventures today. And there we go. Can everybody see that okay? And
Yeah.
Brendan, have you done the necessary pinning and so on?
I have. You are pinning.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about singing for video games. Right off the bat, I want to clarify some confusion. If you heard Brendan pronounce my last name a different way than you've heard it, I accept both pronunciations. It is Intravia or Intravia. It just doesn't matter to me anymore. Let's dive in. So who the heck? I am a remote recording vocalist and instrumentalist. I wear a lot of different hats as a musician. I'm also an arranger and orchestrator for various ensembles, not just including my band Disco Cactus, but also for some orchestral and wind ensemble performances, and also occasionally for games I'll do some vocal arranging. I've also done some work as a lyricist for games mostly. Brendan mentioned I'm a core member of Disco Cactus. we rock. I'm also a liturgical musician as my correlating career, and I will get more into what a correlating career has to do with video game music later. But I work as a assistant music director to the to the Diocese of Bridgeport, and I gig around as an organist and a pianist. I also occasionally moonlight as an opera singer when the opportunity arises, and I've done very very minimal voice acting work, but there it is. And I also work as a private teacher. So, do you even know who I am? I have worked on a lot of different types of franchises, but these are probably the ones that I'm the most well known for. I've had a long-running collaboration with the folks at Bungie on the Destiny and Destiny 2 series, and more recently Destiny Rising, which is I think the mobile version of the game, and also the Mortal Kombat series. And one of the most recent high-profile games was Star Wars Outlaws, where I was a instrumentalist and backup alien singer for the Cantina Band soundtracks in that world, if anybody's played that game. Oh, I should have played an example of that because there's a really funny before and after. Maybe we'll get to that at the end, but these are some of the projects I worked on. So let's talk about the legend of Laura's education. When I was a baby, I grew up on Long Island, and I was very much a band geek and a gaming geek. I loved game music so much that I was transcribing it by ear. The only reason I'm mentioning this is so that you understand how this has been a part of the fabric of my life from a very young age, and how I became involved in, or at least interested in, composing and arranging. Because after transcribing video game music, I started to think about writing for, films, and I was, fantasizing about being the next John Williams or some such. For undergrad, I went to Ithaca College. I started as a composition major, but I ended up adding classical voice performance as a major at the strong encouragement of my former teacher, Debbie Lifton, who unfortunately passed away very recently. So I would not be sitting here talking to y'all if she hadn't encouraged me to do that. So love you, Debbie. And then grad school, whoops, I wanted to go to grad school for composition, but unfortunately I was not accepted anywhere. And I'm only mentioning this because I want you to understand that there is no right way to do this career. I would have loved to go to grad school, but it just wasn't in the cards for me. I was accepted to New England Conservatory in Boston U for voice, which I definitely wanted to do, but then my parents sat me down and had a very important talk with me about what it meant to go into debt, which is bad. So they basically talked me into deferring my enrollment, which I'm very glad that they encouraged me to do that, because right around that time, I was contacted by Video Games Live, who had seen a performance of me, a video that had gone viral for 2008 standards, performing in costume. That picture on the top left is an actual photo from that performance where I was doing a whole skit as, Link from Legend of Zelda. And they saw a video of it and invited me to perform that skit at one of their shows. And long story short, they invited me back to perform more, and I became one of the principal soloists that performed with them. And shortly after, performing the first time, I was like, what I really do is singing. And they ended up, transitioning me into more vocal roles. And eventually I talked them into letting me arrange and orchestrate for the show. And this is all relevant because this is where I first started meeting composers in the industry. It was a fully lucky break kind of moment. I was sitting at the autograph tables next to these composers like Mike Salvatore, Marty O'Donnell, Christopher Tin, all of these very heavy hitters in the industry were just there at these shows, and I was befriending them and getting to know them, and I had just sung on stage for them. So they talk about the audition opportunity of a lifetime, right? Very cool. When do we get to the singing for the video games part? Let's start with my very first gig. So this actually wasn't a singing gig. This was for flute. But one of those composers I met while I was touring was Norihiko Hibino, who is one of the original composers for the Metal Gear Solid series, for Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater specifically. He did write that song, if you gamers are familiar with it. He is the guy. He invited me to record for a track on a game called Automedius Excellent, which translates to Gradius for Girls. Yikes. And it was written by Michiyu Yamane, and he wanted me to record jazz flute. He had heard me play flute on the tour, and he wanted a lot of heavy jazz improvisation. And then he said, "Do you have a microphone to record with?" And I had to stop and think for a minute, because the only microphone that I had in the house looked like this. And in case you're wondering, this is not a recording microphone. And this is probably from the year 2003. But I did say yes. And this is the microphone I used, and I will play for you what it sounded like right now. Can everybody hear that okay? Uh-oh. You may have noticed that that clip is drowning in reverb, and I think that's the only way they were able to save it, because this is not acceptable. You should never record anything on a microphone that looks like this. So don't do what I did, but I am still glad I did it. Cool. I was told this workshop was singing for video games. Let's talk about the first time I ever sang for a game. So this was the same composer, Norihiko. About a year later, he invited me to contract a group of singers. We needed SATB quartet. I'm putting that in quotes because it wasn't truly like written for SATB. It was just like 2 girls and 2 guys. What they wanted were pop belting vocals in the style of Glee. The theme was high school love, and that did end up being the name of the song. And they asked me, can you do like R&B, like Mariah Carey style improv? And another moment where I had to stop and think about this for a minute, because it is true that I had never really attempted to do something like that before, but I felt reasonably sure that I could pull this off. And what am I going to do? Say no? No, you say yes. So I am actually going to play this whole thing for you because the lyrics are incredible, and Brendan Shapiro's husband, Omar Najmi, is one of the singers in this, and I just think that's so great, and everybody should experience this. Monday morning always comes too soon. Just left the school Friday afternoon. Pens and notebooks, papers. That's me singing. Don't they have an app to clean my room? All I really want to do is hit the ball, make the final score and win the game for all. Sneakers, lockers, feet-ball running on the court. Ace, dig, it, attack, and lock, then walking down the hall. There's Omar coming up. Tell me where you've been all of my life. Walking down the hall, now I see you. Where have you been? Let's chat now. You want to go with me to the dance? Just text me back. Let me know. Tell me, will you be my date at the party? And boy meets girl, and life is so good. When I met you, I knew you were the right one. We're on the phone. We'll text forever. LOL. I know you love chocolate and ice cream. I'll cheer you on at all your games forever. Let's go get some cheeseburgers and fries. When I'm with you, nothing else matters. 'Cause you're here with me forever. I know you love chocolate and ice cream. I'll cheer you on at all of your games. School is so great. I'm laughing because the first time I played this for Brendan, that saxophone lick at the beginning like just sent you. I've never seen you laugh so hard.
It's true.
So but that was my first exposure to singing for games. And this was not a remote recording gig, or I absolutely would not have been able to pull this off at this point with the microphone I had. We actually went to a studio in New York City where the Japanese composers were like Skyping in basically and giving us live feedback. So it was like 7 at night for us and like 7 in the morning for them. And the vibes in the room were it was just incredible. So the first time I had a big break, because at this point I was starting to realize that maybe I can do this whole recording for video games more often. So I went on to record a few small projects here and there, and mostly small indie games and mobile games, where I was working on fan arrangement projects or composers' personal projects on websites like OC Remix and Shine Sparkers and so on. And I was starting to build up my studio, researching what I needed, not just from forums, but just from asking my friends who were more well-versed in this stuff. And Destiny was my first AAA title. I had met Mike Salvatore at the meet and greet tables at VGL. I'd seen him, several times over the years, and he had a couple of tracks that they were recording for one of the expansions for Destiny that he thought I would be a good fit for. And I ended up collaborating with him and 2 other composers who were on the lead group for that, C. Paul Johnson and Sky Lewin. We were doing a combination of different techniques, solo vocals, multi-tracking, which is recording yourself a bunch of times to create harmonies. We began developing sort of what would become the iconic sound for whenever I was singing in the games, which was a very like clear, soft tone and minimal vibrato, because they like to mess around with the voice and like add effects to it that make it sound more alien. So I'll play you just a little bit of one of the first things I ever recorded for them, and then later tracks so you can hear how much the sound changed as we were working. I don't know why the audio skips like that. So it's very hushed, very low. In that, actually, there's actually like a lot more liberal vibrato than I've ever been asked to do in any other game. But they wanted sort of an alien, you know, sound, so they were having me like hum, but with my mouth slightly open. They were very into exploring like different weird, you know, vocal effects for that. And this is much later on. This is more what the sound is now whenever I perform with them. It's going to do that every time. You can hear they added liberal delay. So having vibrato in there would have messed that up, that effect. So you can hear it, it's got its own identity now. And now when I'm collaborating with them on projects, we kind of skip the part of the conversation, which is, so what are you looking for? Now I know. When you've been collaborating with somebody for that long, it saves a lot of time. And that's why some composers tend to work with the same vocalists over and over again. Like with Bungie, it's half probably like we like working with Laura, we know how she works and we have a good rapport, but also it's partially like the art of the game, like the players got attached to it, so we keep incorporating it into the game, right? But a lot of it comes down to like who vibes well with who, right? Because if you're going to be collaborating on such a close basis artistically, like you got to be on the same page, not just in terms of, you know, artistry, but also, you know, personality and stuff like that. So tell me how to sing on the video games. We have finally arrived at this portion of the presentation. So the first thing we got to talk about is building your studio. And this was the sort of thing that really created a lot of anxiety for me when I first started. I felt like unqualified, like I didn't major in sound recording technology. So should I really be doing this? Like, if I can do this, I'm not a gearhead. I'm not like, this was not my jam. I did a lot of asking around with people, and it took me a while to really perfect like my workflow in my studio. But I'm only saying this to say that if I can do this, anybody can do this. So I actually took a video a few days ago, rather than trying to pull my webcam around the room, I took a little video of a tour of my studio. So I'm going to play that right now. All right, welcome to studio tour time. This is in my bedroom. This is the edge of the bed right here. So this is my office space is condensed into this little area. Obviously, it would be more ideal if I had a space that was dedicated to recording, not just for, you know, technical considerations, but also for, you know, mental health space. It's always better to not be working in your bedroom. But if you don't have that option, like I don't have that option right now, this is totally workable. I have been doing this for years. You would not believe how many major video game soundtracks I have recorded on in a setup very similar to this in the corner of a bedroom. So let's go through everything one by one. Over here is the vocal recording booth, such as it is. So I have a combination of sound treatment panels that I've put on the ceiling. These are just foam panels that I ordered from companies that sell packages of these things. And these standing baffles, which are from a company called ClearSonic. I think I might have gotten all of this from ClearSonic, but there's lots of different options out there. The point of all of this sound treatment is to absorb as much reflection as possible that would cause a reverb. Things that cause a reverb are hard surfaces. So I've got These baffles standing against the wall here, these are adjustable, like you can just move them around. They're two separate panels, so they're not connected to each other. You could get away with one, but I find it easier to have two so you can get a proper enclosure. If I didn't have these standing baffles, I would have just put all of these pieces of foam directly onto the wall, or I mean additional pieces of foam directly on the wall, and it would have the same effect. But I got these like 10 years ago and I really do like them, so happy to have those. It saves me a little time every time I move from having to, you know, stick a bunch of push pins into the walls. Over here is my closet. Not ideal that I have this huge like wooden panel here exposed, but I haven't noticed any issues in my recording. I think because I'm deep enough into the corner here, it's not really picking that up. The ceiling would have been a problem. You always want to cover the ceiling with something because sound goes up, and you always want to cover the floor for sure. You never want to record in a space that has a hard floor. You got to throw a rug down. And if I did have issues with this wood picking up the reflection, I would just throw a blanket over it like a curtain. That does the same thing. Over here, I've got my recording mic with a pop screen. These things are so annoying to adjust. Luckily, this one's staying up. The pop screen will catch any plosive sounds I'm making and dull them a little bit. It's not foolproof, so you do have to watch out for that in your recording. You don't want to be too close to the mic. This is my music stand where the music goes, and a label so I don't forget my last name. And over here is my recording rig and digital audio workstation. I use Reaper. The microphone that's over there is plugged into this interface over here. And the reason the microphone isn't here, this is just a dynamic mic that I use for like being on voice chat and stuff like that, is that I'm trying to keep the microphone as far away from the computer as possible, because every now and then the fans kick on and it creates a humming noise, and I want the mic to pick up as little noise as possible. You may have noticed that there are some birds singing outside my window. If I were recording right now, I would have to throw a snowball at them to get them to fly away. I also just threw in a load of laundry, so if you hear that humming in the background, you definitely don't want to do that if you're about to do a recording session. Perfect silence is key. Over here, we've got the sound interface that the mic is plugged into. This is kind of an old one because my more recent interface, one of the inputs stopped firing, so if I was recording in stereo, if I needed a left and a right microphone, one of those wasn't working. But for vocal recordings, you really only need mono. That's the long and short of it. And this is also a Bluetooth keyboard, so when I'm recording, I'll actually bring this over here to my music stand, and that way I can control, you know, everything going on in there. Stop, play, record, Control Z, all of that stuff from over here. So it saves me some time walking back and forth. There are probably pieces of technology that are like smaller than this that, you know, accomplish the same thing, but I don't know, this works for me. And on top of that, I've got my noise canceling headphones that I wear when I'm recording. You definitely don't ever want to be recording with stuff coming out of like these speakers. I would use those to listen to the recording afterwards to make sure that it sounds good, but for recording you definitely need to listen through a pair of these that have this enclosure on them that does not let the sound that you're hearing through the headphones escape. And now I'm going to cut back to the live presentation to talk about how this guy works. All right, so a couple of things that I didn't mention in the course of that video is that in addition to the foam panels that are on the ceiling and the standing baffles, there are other objects in the room that are dampening the sound, like the bed, the bureau, the bookshelf, and stuff like that. Virtually anything can work as like sound treatment as long as it's not like a perfectly flat surface, right? So I'm only mentioning this so that nobody gets the idea that like you could have a completely empty room and just treat like one corner and you're good to go. If you had an empty room with no bed, like it's not a bedroom, you would have to put panels along all of the walls, put a rug that covers the entire floor. You wouldn't necessarily have to put paneling all over the ceiling, but probably over like where you're actually standing. And Tommy Rose just made an excellent observation, which I'm actually going to talk about desperation mode approaches to sound treatment in a minute. You can put like literally anything against the wall. You could put a mattress against the wall. You could, you know, sing in front of a bunch of curtains. Like as long as it's soft or like, you know, a surface that diffuses sound, that's the goal, because you never want to give a composer a track that has reverb on it, because they want to be able to mix the voice into their track to make it sound like it's in whatever space it needs to sound like, right? And reverb creates the illusion of distance, right? So if they wanted you to be really close to the mic, if you had natural reverb in your track, that possibility would be removed for them. But if you had no reverb at all, they could do whatever they want to fit you into the mix. So you give them the most amount of options by having a totally dry track. Let's see. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention is this recording booth setup isn't ideal because I'm right next to a window where the birds fly and the cars drive and so on. You want to try to keep your stuff close to the interior of the house. The reason I have it right next to the window is that the way my room is set up is that all of the outlets are on like one side of the room, and I wasn't crazy about, trying to run cables under my bed. So this was the best case scenario, and it hasn't presented too many problems unless there are the birds, and in which case that's why we have snowballs. Have you ever used a recording shield? I did used to have one. I think they work reasonably well, but I still think you would have to do a bunch of other treatment on the walls, and after a while I found it kind of annoying to try to fashion the shield around the microphone, and I had to do so much treatment for the rest of the room that I felt like it was becoming kind of redundant at that point. But if you were like on the road or something, right? Like if you were singing an opera somewhere else for a month and you had to do like an emergency recording, I think those shields can come in clutch. So they're not like useless or anything like that. Let's see. Whoops. All right. Oh no, we're going on the tour again. There we go. So building your studio. So let's look at some costs here. This is an example gear list. This is all of the stuff that you just saw in that video. And I'll make this slideshow available to Brendan maybe afterwards. We can send them a link to it so you can see all the slides with all the info and stuff. But if you were to tally all of this up, you're looking at about $1,500 to get all of the pieces of this studio. And there are various ways that you can save money. A lot of websites have bundle deals. For example, I got the microphone and the Focusrite, the sound interface, the red box, as part of a bundle where I saved $100 right there, and that's huge because these microphones are expensive. And another thing you can do is you could, if there isn't a bundle on the website, you can email them to ask. Like, a company is going to be motivated by I want to spend $1,500 at your website. Can you give me 10% off? Like, it's very rare that they're going to say no, right? Like, they're about to get this huge sale. And Sweetwater is super helpful, almost too helpful. If you buy anything from Sweetwater, they will call you for the rest of your life once a year just to check in about your gear. I see people nodding. You know what it's all about. So they're very, very kind people, and they can answer any questions you have. Like, if you were to email them and say, like, what do you recommend for vocals? They probably have a list of microphones that they can throw you. It's like, I can spend this amount of money. What do you recommend? And they'll help you out with that. All right.
Hey, Laura, I just want to make sure you saw that we have a question from Kartik.
Oh, sorry. Did I skip that one?
Oh, no, he just raised his hand in the Zoom.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, let's. My bad. I have the window shrunk. Yes, please ask your question.
Are you going to go into your PC setup at any point in terms of like just what your rig is?
I hadn't thought of like the PC itself, like what core processor and so on. But my next slide is going to be about the DAW that I use a little bit. So that's a really good question because you do need it. I didn't put computer on here. You obviously need one of those. So I can do a follow up with like what PC specs I have afterwards. Again, I'm not a gearhead, so like off the top of my head, I actually couldn't tell you what is in my computer right now. But I usually ask a friend who's more in the know, and he finds like these deals on Newegg for me. But let me remind me at the end of the session about that, and I will I'll send an email to Brendan. He can follow up with the specs and everything. But that's an excellent question because the computer does matter.
I can also say, as on the computer side of things, that we are very close to a micro center here in Cambridge, and they are amazing for computers. Like my current rig and my first PC got all the parts there. Everyone's super helpful there, and they can even build it for you if you want.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah, if you can get a custom-made copy, that's huge. And Tommy Rose just mentioned in the meeting chat that RAM is the most important because audio, quick and dirty lesson about this, with audio, we are constantly buffering and loading the sound because it's something that we're experiencing in real time, right? Like we're not loading a picture and there it is. We are constantly loading and playing the sound. So the RAM is necessary for it to be able to run, a lot of sound at once. And so composers who build their own rigs, and a lot of them do, they're buying like the biggest RAM sticks you can possibly get. 32 gigabytes of RAM is recommended. that's huge. So that's going to be the main focus of whatever computer you get. It's not going to be about the graphics card, I guarantee. So let's dive back in here. Oops, I got to move the window out of the way. What if I live in a closet in Boston or in any major city? So there's only so much you can do to control outside noise. So you want to try to live on a quiet street. Yay. I usually got around. I used to live next to a train station, like straight up. So I just had to wait every half an hour for the train to go by, and that was the only thing I can do. I also tended to record at night, so I wouldn't be disturbing like the other people that were. It was a studio like in a building, so all of the other offices would be closed. So that's when I was doing my recording. You got to get creative about stuff like that. The biggest issue I find when I'm recording is it's low frequency noises, like a bird flying by the window, like, yeah, it might pick that up, but a truck driving by on the street, even if the truck is quite quiet in and of itself, the rumble might get picked up on the mic, and it stands out in a mix. If a composer here, if you spliced between two different takes, for example, and one didn't have the truck and one did, that would stand out in the mix, and he might be like, you know, they might be tearing their hair out saying like, where is that rumbling coming from? So you want to watch out for that. Living next to a train station would really suck. So try not to do that. You want to set up as close to the interior of the house as you can to be away from noises from the outside. So again, try to avoid windows and things like that. A window is also a flat surface that would reflect the sound, so you have to put curtains in front of it. As I mentioned before, almost anything can act as sound treatment. Bookshelves, rugs, curtain clothes. Speaking of clothes, if you're desperate, put your microphone in your closet, make a V, you know, in the clothes that are already in there, and put the microphone in the center, put a blanket over your head, or close the door behind you. I know people actually that took just a normal closet in their house, and they spent a lot of money on this, so this is not cost effective, but they got all of the padding that you would need for like a truly legit recording studio, and they just fitted like a clothes closet with it. Straight up. So you don't have to do that. But clothing, it's all soft and squishy, right? Like that's going to diffuse plenty of the sound. So it is totally workable to do that. And yes, I see people in the chat that are like, oh yeah, that's the thing that I did. You can also make a pillow for it. Like I've literally been in a hotel room holding 2 giant pillows next to my head as I sang into a microphone just to keep the sound from going sideways, and a pillow in front of me. I know a singer who flipped a whole couch on its end in a hotel room and hung the microphone from the ceiling. I don't think you need to do that, but I still think that's great. So if you're ever in a situation, because another thing I didn't mention in the course of the studio is that it pays to have something that's portable. Like obviously if I was traveling somewhere for a gig, and like we travel, right? When we're singing opera, sometimes we got to go live somewhere for a month or a few months. You don't need to bring all of your sound treatment with you. That's what the closet's for. But if you have a microphone stand, microphone, and a interface that works with your laptop, and you can record either on Reaper or like some other like, you know, low threshold program that doesn't require like a huge amount of space on your laptop. Like you could even get away with Audacity if you wanted. You never know when a gig will come along. And there have been so many cases where like I was like traveling for something else and somebody was like, I need a recording turned around like tonight. I'm like, okay, let me grab the pillows, you know, and you just dive right in. So if you can get a rig that's portable, that might pay off in the long run. I know somebody, I'm not kidding, this like a month ago, we were at the MagFest convention in Maryland, and we were all hanging out in the room just having fun. And then all of a sudden he got up and walked out of the room, came back a half hour later and told us that he had to record a voice clip for something. He's a voice actor, and they had some sort of emergency turnaround thing. The very next day, he found out that his voice was used in a skit on Saturday Night Live. And like, thank God he had his microphone with him. Because can you imagine? So doing something that's portable is always worth it. And a lot of this stuff really is. It's just the sound treatment that would be a problem. So let's see. Let's take a tiny look at a DAW or a digital audio workstation. If anyone's looking at these screenshots and feeling scared, I want to impress upon you again, I had no expertise in any of this when I started. I really believe anybody can learn how to do this. So showing you how to use any specific DAW is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I just want to go over some of the basics of how I use mine. We're looking at a DAW called Reaper, which I like a lot because it is professional grade. Like I know composers who have been nominated for Grammys that exclusively use this program, but it's also like impossibly cheap. Most DAWs are like the high-end ones are like at least $600 in a lot of cases. But this is only, first of all, this has a 2-month like trial period, which is huge. A lot of programs only do like a week or 10 days. And then when you want to buy it, It's $70. Like, you can't beat that. And Reaper, I don't want to say it has a steep learning curve, because like, if you understand the basic principles of how these programs work, it's actually quite like usable. And I mean, there's tons of forums online for this stuff. Like, there's, YouTube is your friend. Like, you can find anybody that will walk you through this on YouTube and how to use this kind of program. And Tommy Rose just pointed out there is an education discount, I think, for Reaper, but honestly, what you would use is the commercial discount. If you go to the website and check this out, we don't make the threshold per year that they would need for the commercial license, which would be a $200 profit. So, or cost. So there are free options of programs like Audacity, but I think this is more flexible and offers more in virtually every part of the program. So this picture, the screenshot here, is from a real project that I did last year called Skystriders. So basically, what your workflow might look like. Let me just move the Zoom window out of the way. 1 second. So in the middle, this is kind of hard to see because I have an extra wide monitor, but the composer will very likely send you a MIDI tempo map, which is something that you import into the program that will tell you where the measures are and where the time changes are, time signature changes, tempo changes, things like that. Then you load in the audio after that, and everything should line up. Like measure 44 should be in the same spot in the audio that it is in that MIDI tempo map. So that just saves you some time if you're trying to like record in chunks or something like that. Then they might also send you a separate track of the mock-up vocal. Like if they had, a placeholder that they were using for the purposes of their writing, that will probably be a separate track, or you should ask for one if they do. And they also might send you a audio of a click track. But in Reaper, if they sent you a tempo map, you can just use the metronome setting to set up a click track on your end. And the way these windows are organized is I use a color coding system to help me keep track of what I'm looking at, because doesn't this look like a nightmare right now? So the tracks that I don't need to record on, I color code in red, so I can find those really quickly if I need to check something in the fake vocal, right, or in the mock-up or something like that. And at the top, I have all of the solo portions. If he needed me to, this composer, his name is Greg Nicolette, if he needed me to record a solo of something, I mark it as solo A, solo B, solo C, because I want to give a composer as many options as possible. This saves time of them having to come back at me and say, actually, what I was looking for is this. Sometimes a composer will tell you straight up, like, I want bel canto. Okay, got it. That I can do. But sometimes they don't really know. So if you give them a bunch of options, here's one with heavy vibrato. Here's one with light vibrato. Here's one that's more like wispy and childlike or something. They can say, that's the one I want. And then you can, take it from there if you need to do more takes. And down here, I have a bunch of multi-tracked things. He wanted a choral sound. And I'll actually play a little bit of this project later in this presentation. But over here on the right, these are just things that I do in my workflow. You can't see it in this screenshot because it was too big. But I always, after I'm done recording, I always duplicate the recorded files and put them at the top of my workflow, so that if I accidentally delete something when I'm splicing things together that I needed, I can just go back to that duplicated track and grab that. And finally, when I'm recording, I like to add a small amount of reverb because it just helps me, I don't know, it feels better. Like, we're not used to having to sing in a totally dead space, right? Like we like a little reverb, and it helps me perform better. So I put a very small amount on my track. There's different plugins you can use to do that. But when you export it, turn it off. It's not a big deal. Like, a composer will just write back to you and say, hey, I noticed that you put some reverb on these. And you can say, I'm so sorry, I will resend them without that. But you never want to leave the reverb on the track, basically. So, random recording tips that have saved me. I actually think this is in many ways the most important slide in this presentation, because these are just some things I learned like on the go as I was doing this. So when you're recording, do a test. Loudest part of the track with the click, listen back. If you're too loud, if it peaked, you got to turn the microphone down, or you have to back up a little bit. It kind of depends. You have to feel it out. If you're not in time, you have to try it again and make sure that you can hear the click well enough that you will be singing in time with this. Don't listen back after every take once you have gotten going. You will drive yourself crazy. Like, we hate listening to ourselves, right? Like Uncanny Valley, we're getting lost in the sauce. Like, this vibrato moment was like wobblier than the other. Don't do that to yourself. Let yourself get into the workflow. Record at least 3 takes before you stop and listen to anything after the test recording, that is. Let yourself get into the workflow. If the song is very long, do it in chunks. Don't do a full pass of an 8-minute song. You're going to be vocally exhausted. You know, it pays to maybe sing through the whole thing once just to kind of get a feel for, you know, what the problem spots are going to be. But if you're going back to spot check things, do it in small chunks, like sizable chunks, so that you could, not sizable chunks, small ones, so that you don't tire yourself out. Because this can get exhausting. Singing the same thing over and over again, especially if it's high, that will tire you out in a different way than singing an opera. So you want to look out for that. Accept and embrace the torment of singing to a click. Brendan can tell you the first time he ever had to perform to a click with Video Games Live with me, he was saying, I swear it's speeding up and slowing down. It's not. Isn't music wonderful? We're so used to having the give and take and the natural rubato and expressiveness of live performing. All of that is gone when you're singing for video game music.
Thanks for calling me out on that, Laura.
I have a video of that. It was so funny, but it was such an impressive like display of like, wow, we really do rely on feeling like the rhythm more than we are like counting at a metronomic pace. So the click will be a challenge if you've never done it before. It just takes practice. You can do it. If plosives are a problem, you can turn your head slightly to one side. Ideally, you want to just not be plosing too hard, but if you turn slightly for that one word, you'll probably get away with it. If you're struggling to hear something in the mix, try turning other things down rather than turning things up, because before you know it, everything's blasting and you can't hear yourself. If you're struggling to hear yourself, this is killer. Take one headphone off and put it against the back of your head. Now I can hear the track through this phone and I can hear my voice in the room on this one. And it saves me so many times, because it really does feel weird to be singing and like hearing your voice from far away but through headphones. This is a really, really good technique for that. If you add reverb, turn it off. If the composer asks you what tracks you want, oh Jacob, I see your hand, 1 second. If they ask you what tracks do you want to record to, I tend to, because they can send you different mixes, strings only, percussion only, whatever. I usually ask for, give me the background instrumental as one, give me the mock vocal as another, and the click track as a third. That way I can mute whatever I need to when I'm working on the project. That's a quick and dirty way to do it. And again, we already talked about this, but send multiple options. Composers love that. I saw that Jacob O'Shea raised his hand.
Do you prefer over-ear headphones or in-ear? I know there can be different, with your over-the-ear, do you prefer open back, closed back? Like headphones feel like that's a deep rabbit hole and it has a huge effect on your ability to sense yourself.
100%. Yeah. So I don't like in-ears because they don't stay in my ears very well. I find these more comfortable. In-ears, I think they're fine to use as long as no audio is coming out of the headphone itself. You have to make sure they're jammed in there so the microphone's not hearing what you're hearing. I believe you need closed-backed headphones, because open back would mean that sound could escape from underneath the headphone. I actually they're not handy right now, but I do have a set of open back headphones that I use for mixing because I can hear things better. But for recording, you need the closed back. Like this creates a seal around my ear, so the microphone can't hear anything that's coming out of that. Where was I? I use in-ear monitors myself to give myself more freedom around my jaw. Oh, that's a good question. That's a good point, Terry, actually. Yeah, if you have jaw issues, the in-ears might be more comfortable. I can never get them to stay in my ears. So now that we've looked at some recording tips, oh, did anybody else have questions while I'm paused? Everybody still good? Okay. All right, let's talk about some RPGs, or really popular gig types, RPGTs. All right, so we've got a couple here that I've run into more often than anything else. There's always outliers, but these are the most common ones I've run into for singing for games. There's the classical singing. They want opera. Straight up, I've been more recently in the past like year or so seeing in the descriptions like we're looking for a bel canto sound specifically. I don't know if they know what bel canto means, but generally it just means they want singing with vibrato. There's no guarantee that these composers have any idea what vocal fox are, by the way. If you tell them, they might just like look at you funny. If you say opera singer, they know what that means. You know, it depends on their background and education. But not every composer has gone to, classical music school or even music school at all. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to them. They're happy to learn. You just might have to explain. usually you run into classical music. For JRPGs, it's very popular there. Chinese games as well. Fantasy games have been using that sound a lot lately, and also diegetic music. Occasionally they want a singer in the background of a scene performing an opera aria. That's you. There's actually a really great example of this, if you're curious. In one of the Assassin's Creed games, there's a mission that takes place in the back of an opera house, and they recorded an opera singer with a Baroque. It was, it was taking place in a time when they would have been performing this type of opera. And they got a little Baroque, instrument ensemble on stage with the singer, and they surrounded her with microphones so that when your character is moving behind the background of the opera house, you would shift, it would shift where the sound would be coming from, as though you were walking around where the singer was. It's very fascinating. And like, you had to see this microphone rig. It was crazy. I would have died to do something like that. Musical theater and pop. We explored that earlier with the cheeseburgers and fries song. Usually it can be for literally any type of game. It's not always tongue in cheek, although that obviously was. Experimental, this is a big one. So a lot of fantasy and sci-fi games, they want like an alien or inhuman sounding voice. This is where you actually get into like kind of trying to invent a new way to sing, right? And coming up with a sound that nobody's heard before, right? Character voice, this is a weird one that comes up sometimes. What if they hired an actor for a scene that can't sing? Now it's your turn to be that actor. So they have a character voice that they've already established. So your job as the singer is to get as close as you can to their speaking voice, but singing. It's not always that actors can't sing. Sometimes it comes down to, whoops, we forgot to add a song to the game, and that actor's contract was only arranged for, there's just all sorts of like bureaucratic things that can go wrong there, right? So it's very rare, but when you do, boy howdy, it's like some of the hardest stuff you have to do, because if that's not the normal way you sing, you'll spend an hour in front of the microphone being like, what if I raise my soft palate on like just the left side? Like you start doing really weird stuff to try to imitate the voice, but it can be quite fun when you pull it off. But that's an option. The songwriter gig. So a lot of people will assume that vocalists are also songwriters. Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. We'll look at a gig, a songwriting gig in a second to look at an example of this. But if you enjoy writing lyrics, then this is an opportunity that comes up actually quite often. It's usually if they're introducing a new character to a game and this is like their song, or it's the end credit sequence of a game. That's when they're usually writing proper songs. And then the multi-tracker gig, which is, it can be anything, but it's basically when they want you to record multiple versions of yourself to create the illusion of this full choir. If you've ever listened to Carl Jenkins's like Audiamos CDs, it employs that effect, and a lot of games like to mess around with that. So let's look at some examples of gigs. So this is an example of an experimental gig. Mortal Kombat 1, my friend Wilbert Roger wrote the music for this. Again, these are usually sci-fi or fantasy-oriented games where they want something to sound unorthodox. They might ask for ornamentation or embellishment. Hopefully they give you a reference track of what they're looking for, because otherwise you're just flying blind. They very often do, or the composer might demonstrate it themselves. But I'll just play a little bit of this one. And fun fact, I was very sick when I recorded this. So that's an example of like, they wanted something to sound sort of haunting and maybe even, sacred in a way. One thing to watch out for gigs like this is potential appropriation. Composers are going to be influenced by real world music, right? That's just a given. There's a difference between this kind of track, which is sort of like generically sacred vocalization on minor scale to accompany this like alien timekeeper character, and a composer who's doing like, say they're writing for an obviously Indian-inspired character, and the music sounds Indian, and they're asking you, a non-Indian person, to sing in a specifically an Indian style that you're not familiar with. Not a great idea, and that's the sort of gig that should make you maybe think twice. And we'll get into gigs that you should say no to later, but just watch out for that in these kinds of projects, because it has happened to me where I had to turn something down where they were asking me to do a style that I was really not comfortable with. Right. Songwriter gig. So this is an example of like a much more in-depth collaboration with a composer. So in this example, they were revealing a new character skin, like they were going to have a new outfit for one of the popular characters in the game, and they had this whole like cinematic reveal for it. Usually with these types of projects, they'll actually give you a bunch of like, it almost looks like character sides that you might read from for a voice acting gig or something like that. Like, here's a description of the character. Here's the backstory in the game. Here is some concept art of the character. Here's what we want the song to be about. Like, all of the instructions are right there. They also might tell you which themes to avoid. This is a real thing, but if you're working on a game that is being created by a Chinese studio, they're going to ask you to specifically avoid words like revolution and so on. So there's that. Lots of back and forth with the composer. You need to get a lot of there's a lot of steps to getting approval for the lyrics and stuff like that. So it's a very in-depth process. But what I didn't mention about these gigs also is that the turnarounds on these are quite fast usually. Like if you get a week to record something like this, that's huge. Sometimes it's like 2 days. And this isn't because the composer is like lazy or something like that. Sometimes the studio is just like, we need this now. And they're trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat putting this stuff together. So you do have to be pretty quick. Thanks so much for stopping in, Kate. Let's see. So I'm going to show you the evolution of a project like this when there are multiple steps to like the approval process. So they first gave me we agreed on the lyrics, and then they wanted me to take a crack at singing everything. They wanted me to also improvise background harmonies and to put something during the bridge. I'm just going to play a little bit of this, but we'll compare it to what happens later. So currently we're in E minor. This will be important. Also, you can hear the click in this recording because I exported it from an old file. So this is also unmixed, so you can hear kind of what a raw track would sound like. So, actually, I'll play a little bit more. 1 second. So the first note I received back after sending this in was, can you maybe not do the vibrato so much? And this is the comment I've gotten the most often on projects like this, is that when sometimes they want the full opera vibrato, and when they want, I mean, they really want it. But a lot of times when they're looking for something that just, they want it to sound more like pretty, the vibrato just feels too powerful to them, and I get that comment more often than anything else. So this is the second version of this, where we did it softer. I was told to sing more like Disney princess. Play a little bit of this one. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. I thought I deleted it. You can hear it's a lot more muted now. My beautiful vibrato, it's all gone. And then after recording the entire song, so we finally got it in the pocket of what we wanted, the client turned around and said, "It sounds too high. Can she do the entire thing in D minor instead?" So we had to re-record the entire thing. And like at this point, by the way, you should be getting paid more for this. And oh, by the way, if you're writing lyrics for anything, you should be getting paid more for that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if they ask you to re-record huge chunks like this, that's beyond the pale, and you should be asking for more money. So I'll just play a little bit of the new key because I think it's kind of funny. Please, here we go. Same song, just lower. And I hate to admit that they're right, but it does sound gentler in the lower key. So this was a rarity for something to be re-recorded this late in the game, but It does happen, so just be ready for that in the event that it does. Okay, so I'm just going to show some quick examples here. I'm realizing I'm getting a little short on time for this. The multi-tracker, this can be either a supporting role for a track, like behind a main vocal line, or it could be like the main event. They want it to be this choral sound. There's a couple of basic rules to multi-tracking. Like, there's no hard and fast like system to this, but 3 voices is better than 1 voice is better than 2 voices. 2 voices together is going to sound strident and weird. It's the same principle for strings, actually. If you're going to have like a group of strings versus like a quartet, you know, like one on a part, like you generally want to stay away from just having the 2 voices. Something about 3 is just the magic number. The intonation doesn't have to be perfect in multi-tracking. Like, the slight differences in intonation are what are going to give it that fuzzy choral sound, right? But if you're listening back and a certain note or passage is consistently out of tune in the same way in all of the voices, that's something that you should re-record. Composers have programs that can auto-tune stuff, and maybe you even have programs that can auto-tune you. There are no secrets here. We all use the same stuff. They can soften those things out, but I still think it's better form to send them something that is like as close to the proper intonation as possible. Never send them something that's like wildly out of tune and just say, oh, they'll just fix it later. You know, that would be bad form. If you're multi-tracking, vibrato is probably your worst enemy. That's going to sound really weird, especially because it's your voice over and over again. So it's probably going to vibrate in the same way, and the phasing effect of that will be pretty ridiculous. Don't hurt yourself when you're doing multi-tracking. If you're trying to power through a bunch of tracks in one day, try to strategize the order and put in break times, especially if you're going to be singing like alto parts versus like very high soprano parts. It's like, it would be unwise to just jump between those randomly, right? That's going to tire out your voice. So in an ideal world, I try to do all the soprano parts on like the first day, all the alto on the second day, or I try to do at least alto first while my voice box isn't in the ceiling. And then I do soprano last because I feel like that's something I can do more, you know, at least in my own voice with minimal exhaustion. So I'm actually going to tab over to my demo reel page to show you a bunch of different examples of multi-tracking just really quickly. Here we go. Please work, please. Here we go. That was 3 on a part. This is 1 on a part. That's 1 on a part. This is a totally different style. This is an experimental. They wanted a Bulgarian women's choir type sound. There's such huge audio differences between these tracks. Sorry, I was just trying to respond to some people in chat, so let me just do that verbally right now. When you record, typically, do you get the rights to use the finished tracks for your personal website or portfolio? I'm going to be honest, I don't usually ask. I just sort of assume that it's okay because I'm usually only using a fragment of it. So it's not like I'm putting the entire song on my YouTube channel. That would be a problem. But if it's a composer who like he or she, sorry, owns the rights to it, I will ask them to be polite. But if it's like some other company that like, you know, owns the right, like some studio in another country or something like that, I usually don't bother and I just assume it's all okay. And I haven't had a problem with it myself. So let's move on. How do I get gig? So you may have noticed that at no point in my origin story did I mention anything about an agent. I have never had one in my entire career. I actually don't even know personally any remote recording vocalists that use one, or instrumentalists for that matter. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure people do use them, but we're usually communicating directly with the composers because on the music side of things, the composers are kind of left to their own devices. Like they're the ones that are making the call on who to hire and so on, unless like the studio wants to hire a celebrity or something like that. And composers, just like any musician, they want to work with the people that they know and that they feel comfortable with. Like they're less inclined to like talk to an agent to get somebody that they don't know. It would be much more comfortable for them to be able to communicate with that performer directly. So for me, I had the lucky break of VGL, of Video Games Live. Like I got to meet composers through that opportunity. I spoke to my colleague Amanda Aiken this week. For those of you who play Final Fantasy 14, she's the like basically the lead singer of that entire game franchise. Same thing happened to her. She was just invited to sing at a concert of Square Enix music, and Square Enix reps happens to be there, and they liked her so much that they invited her to sing on the games. No agent, never had one, same situation. So this is not to say that you need to have like the same like insane lucky break that we did. I know plenty of folks that have vibrant careers in this industry who did not have something, you know, meteoric like that happen to them. And I haven't been touring with a concert like Video Games Live since 2018. So in the past 7 years, I've been doing a lot more legwork on my own to stay connected and to meet more composers that I can collaborate with. So let's get gig. The ways you can do this are networking at professional game conferences. This is so key. It's like the best opportunity to meet these composers. They're very often super busy every other time of year, like, you know, crunching in their studios. If you go to these events, everyone's hanging out, they're having a good time. You can walk up to anybody and say hello and introduce yourself. It's a very friendly community. I can't emphasize that enough. You could walk up to like literally anybody, any heavy hitter composer, and they would be very friendly and you know, willing to chat with you. Super, super nice people. The two big game conferences you want to consider spending money on are Game Developers Conference in San Francisco and Game Sound Con in Burbank. They are both on the West Coast. That's basically where all the events are. Somebody had a question about this on the spreadsheet when they signed up for this class. Most of the networking events are on the West Coast. Game Developers Conference is super expensive, but there's more international presence there. Game Sound Con is much more affordable. It's a lot cozier. I think it's easier to talk to people at that convention because at GDC, composers are having meetings with like game developers talking about their, you know, next gigs. Like they're going to be busy there. At Game Sound Con, it's more of like an informal hang. Less international folks will be there, but a lot of the LA local composers will be there because they can like drive there from their house, right? So like they can go spend the day there with minimal, you know, cost on their part. So you're more likely to see some of those local folks. Other ways you can network are meeting composers and conductors and so on across various fields. There's more crossover than you think. Has anybody in the chat played a game called Pentiment? It's this great indie game that it's sort of like, I haven't played it myself, I'm just familiar with the music. I've been dying to sit down and do this. They needed a like period group of instrumentalists, and they hired this existing group that performs, like they study Scottish music, like how to perform Scottish operas from like the 1700s or whatever, and they needed this specific niche thing, and they hired this existing group to do it. So they got to work on a video game. It's so cool. Like that could be you, right? If you're working on, like, if you have some particular niche style, or like they need an opera singer for that Assassin's Creed mission, but they need to record somebody in an opera house. Weird stuff like that happens all the time. So the more people you just know in your circle, the more likely you are to stumble into these opportunities, right? Oops, sorry, I blocked my screen again. Music production studios. There are studios that they're called like production houses. One example is Hexany Audio, which I work with quite often. They have a group of composers that works there, and the studio is the point of contact for game developers that are looking for a specific type of song. Like they might contact Hexany, for example, and say, we need a character reveal song. It needs to be an EDM track. We need this kind of singer and these kinds of lyrics. Then Hexany goes to their composers, figures out who would be the best fit for this, and then they get around to hiring a vocalist. So it goes through a few stages that way. It is helpful to be familiar with like literally anybody that works at those studios, because and again, this was an example of like some random person in my circle. A voice actress that I had met very briefly at one of the conventions became a producer at Hexany and threw my name in the ring when an offer came along for a songwriting project that needed a classical singer. Totally random. I had just met this person like a handful of times and we had a good rapport. People look out for each other quite often in this industry. So just again, the more friends you make, the real video games are the friends we made along the way. It's really true. Like those are where you'll find the most success. And again, great community, very easy to make friends. Vocal contractors, I don't have as much experience with that. I'm usually communicating with the composers directly, but I'm sure they're out there. Choirs, sometimes they'll hire a choir for a project, like an existing one. Sometimes they put together a pickup choir. I sang a bunch of pickup gigs in Boston, actually, when I still lived there, and it's purely who you know. I saw a lot of people that I knew from the opera scene in this choir for, you know, the Code Vein game. And then there's also self-promotion. I don't want to discount that, like, it's great to put up clips of yourself on Instagram and LinkedIn and YouTube and stuff like that. It's awesome to have examples of your work out there. I will say, though, like, that in itself can be exhausting. I think FaceTime with composers and other musicians is the most valuable thing that you can do to try to get gigs. So, answering some questions that I got in the spreadsheet. Is most networking on the West Coast where the developers are? Yes, but you don't have to live there. A lot of composers live in different places. Mike Salvatore is, I believe, in Chicago. Sky Lewin is in Seattle. I'm trying to think of random examples. Will Roger is in Seattle. They all work with mega heavy hitter developers, and they don't live on the campus. Composers are very often like not in-house, as it's called. So it's and everybody in this field is very accustomed to working remotely. Like, we really had a leg up when COVID hit because we already had all of these measures in place. So you don't have to live there, but if you want to network, you do have to go there maybe twice a year. Can cold emailing work in certain contexts? Yes. I think it's more valuable for, if example, if you went to one of these events, if you had a friend who knew the composer that you would like to speak with, that friend can introduce you. It's smoother that way. But cold emailing can work if you're trying to reach out to a composer who is maybe just getting started and you're not sure if they have anybody that they work with. Like, let me put it this way. If you were to like email a heavy hitter, like high profile composer and say, here's my stuff, I'd love to work with you, that's probably going to get lost in their inbox. But if you find a composer, an indie composer who's doing something really interesting and you feel like you would be a good fit for their work, like, you shouldn't just, you know, go wild and email everybody who's ever written video game music, right? You should find people for whom you think they would work with live voices and that your voice specifically would fit well with their music. You could reach out to that person and say, I'm a huge fan of your work. I was wondering if you ever work with vocalists. I would love to collaborate with you sometime. And that can turn into like a long-running collaboration down the line. So I'm just going to give you an example. If you are a shy or introverted person and you find that these big mixer events like GDC and GameSoundCon are very overwhelming to you, again, I'll share these slides afterwards, but this is an example of a template that I write to set up a personal meeting with a composer so that you can avoid having to try to insert yourself into a conversation when there's like a massive, you know, gathering going on. It's very loud. It's very overwhelming. You can try to set up a personal meeting. It's not always guaranteed. Again, these composers are meeting with a lot of people, but for the most part, they're very happy to meet fans of their work. And by the way, do be a fan of their work if you send this email. You should be familiar with the work of the composer with whom you're trying to vibe, right? Because they're going to know pretty quickly if you're not familiar with their music. So this is just an example of how you can get that conversation started. And if you don't get to connect with them, you can write a follow-up. I have chased people for years trying to meet them at these conventions, and every time I just reach out politely to say, hey, you know, I was sorry I missed you. And finally, like last year, I finally got to hang out with somebody in person. We had like a lovely conversation. Has it led to work? Not yet, but it might, you know, and I'm just glad to have made the connection, you know. So again, it's all about just making the FaceTime connections and making friends with people. How do I get in touch with companies? Again, you're usually getting in touch with the composers, not the companies. For example, if you wanted to work for Hexany Audio, you probably have a better bet trying to meet up with one of the composers that works there, and then they might remember your name for a project there rather than trying to meet with the guy who owns Hexany Audio. Befriend the artistic person with whom you think you would be a good fit for working. So how do I submit materials for consideration? What materials are preferred? Demo, reels. I'm going to show you very quickly what mine look like. So they're not going to look at, whoa, sorry. I keep accidentally starting the videos. They're not going to necessarily look at your resume very deeply. It's much faster for them to just get right to the demo reel. So there's a website called Reelcrafter that you can use to build. That's the website that I was on before when I was showing you those multi-tracking examples. The website is very easy to use to put together like different groups of tracks, and you can splice them exactly where you want, and you can make custom reels and things like that. It's kind of hard for me to explain quickly like this, but look into Reelcrafter. I'll actually put it in the chat room in case you want to check it out. Oh shoot, I keep trying to reply to a person who's not in in this chat anymore. Okay, there we go. Reelcrafter is a subscription fee, but I find it very easy to use. But if you don't, oh, thank you, Tommy. If you don't want to use Reelcrafter, a YouTube video is fine. Mine looks polished because I paid a friend of mine to do all the animations. You really don't have to do that. You could use like Windows Clipchamp or whatever to just put name of game, composer you worked with, when it came out, like at the bottom of the screen. Whatever. You don't even need to have like video footage. You could just put the title of the game on the screen. I just wanted to make mine look more polished so that it might stand out to them a little bit more and pull them in. You don't have to do this, but I do think a little extra polish does help. I'll just play a little bit of what this looks like. I full screened it. I'm not very good at this technology thing. You can see that I did about a 30-second example for each one. You don't really want to go much longer than that. The first one was a little longer because I had my like picture up and stuff like that. But in general, you just want to give them little bite sizes of a bunch of different styles that you do. Versatility is something that will be rewarded if you can manage it in your reel. Somebody had a question about what you put on your reel if you don't have anything yet. I'm actually going to get to that in a couple of slides. So, for this, in case you're, whoops, I skipped ahead. In case you're wondering, I clipped all of those videos together myself. I ripped them from YouTube. I have no shame about it. You can do it too. It's super easy. When not to get gig. So there are key moments, I think, in every musician's career where you're invited to work on a project of some kind that looks a little sketchy. The mechanism I use to figure out when to say no is the rule of 3. I stole this from my friend Doug Perry, who is a classical and funk fusion percussionist. The rule of 3: good money, good people, good music. If you can get all 3, perfect. If you can get 2 of the 3, it's probably still worth your time. If you can only get 1 of the 3, maybe it's not. That's the one that you have to think more deeply about, right? I think we can all think of times in our career where we took a gig that was a 1 out of 3 or maybe even a 0 out of 3. Like, who amongst us has not said yes to something because we were so excited to just have the opportunity, right? And I don't want to say that like that is in and of itself a bad thing. Like I do think it is good to have credits on your resume, but depending on how much time and aggravation they are requesting from you, you have to balance that with is this credit likely to extend anywhere else in the industry? Did I work with a composer who is likely to recommend me to something else? Because a lot of times one composer says to another, I need an opera singer. And the second composer says, I know somebody, and it's just their friend that they like working with. So if you work with a composer who's not super well connected, and it's not that you shouldn't, but just in this context, if the money isn't great and the music's not sounding great, and this composer isn't particularly well known and you don't know what it's going to be like to work with them, that credit, just getting the credit might not be the payoff that you're hoping for. So it's stuff like that that you want to keep in mind. That being said, though, working with new composers is going to be a huge way for you to get your foot in the door. So a lot of times you're probably going to be overlooking the money for the opportunity to work with this person and maybe on this good music. But let's look at some examples of red flags. We can't afford to pay you, but you'll get lots of exposure. If somebody is saying this to you in the year 2025, I think they are maybe not a good people. And also, this is obviously not going to be a good money. So that for me is a 1 out of 3 maximum. These all happened to me, by the way. I couldn't think of a melody line, so whatever you want to do is fine. Sounds like not a good music to me if I have to write it. So you want, and also if they're going to ask you to write music, you should be getting paid more. So watch out for that. It's one thing if you are agreeing on that sort of collaborative union, but if they're not, and they just send you a track out of nowhere, and they're like, by the way, just do whatever you feel like. I don't know. That sounds like they're asking you to do extra work that you didn't sign up for. Can you do extremely specific ethnic style that you are not trained in, and bonus points if you're white and they know it? Don't do that. That sounds like not a great people, and also not maybe a great music, because if they're relying on some style and asking somebody who clearly has no experience in this style, I don't think that's going to be a great collaborative experience. Emergency. My singer came down sick, and I need someone to record in this musical style you've never attempted and are not adept at track in the next 24 hours. I'll pay you whatever fee you ask for. Can you help? Sounds good. Good money. Maybe this is a person you trust, so it's a good people. And maybe he's a really, or they are a good composer, so it's a good music. What could go wrong? You can go wrong. You should never agree to do a style of music on the fly in an emergency situation if you're not positive you can do it. It's one thing if it's not an emergency, and then you can tell the composer, this is a new style for me. I don't know if I can do it. Can I demo it for you and see how you feel? You've been honest, you've still taken a crack at the opportunity, and you've given them a way out if it's not going to be what they're looking for. But if it's an emergency, if they need something like in hours, you don't want to lie, because that would make you the not good people, and maybe the not good music if you can't pull off the style the way they want you to. So watch out for that too. Sometimes our excitement can get ahead of us, and we say yes to something that we're not equipped for in a high stakes situation. Like before, when I signed up to do the cheeseburgers and fries song, when I didn't really know how to do Mariah Carey improv, it wasn't a high stakes situation because A, I felt like I could do it. I really felt like I could reasonably do it. And B, it wasn't an emergency. In an emergency, you always want to be upfront and honest. So just watch out for that. Rule of 3. It saves me every time. So how can I practice for the day I get the gig? So this goes to the question that I just saw in chat, which was, if you're a newcomer, what do you put on your demo reel? Well, you can collaborate with a composer on a small or passion project for free. This would seem to fly in the face of what I just said about, not good money is not always a good thing. But if you and the composer have an understanding, like, I want the experience of working with somebody, and the composer also wants the experience of writing for a voice, that sounds like a great skill trade to me, and a way to put something on your resume, as long as everyone's on the same page. You know what I mean? It's worse when a composer maybe reaches out to you, I want you to perform on my game. And then you say yes, and then they're like, great, there's no money. That's not great. But if you approach a composer and say, like, listen, I don't know if you have the budget for this project, but I would love to learn how to do this. Would you want to work with me? That's totally worth the time, because what you want is the experience in that case. Examples of where you can try to find composers to work with are student film scores or games. Those people usually don't have budget for stuff, and they'd be willing to take a chance on somebody who's like just learning how to use the tech or something like that. Their own personal projects, and also game jams. These are like these little, they're kind of like Iron Man challenges for video games. You give everybody participating 3 days to make a game. 3 days. And sometimes they have music, and sometimes those composers are churning things out overnight. So a lot of times the composers will just perform whatever music they need themselves. But every now, if you connect with a composer and you say, hey, next time you have a game jam, throw me in, coach. I want to give it a whirl. They might take you up on that. And then you have a game on your resume. Cool. Another way that you can put something together that you could potentially put on a demo reel, record an existing a cappella vocal arrangement, or like a solo performance of something. It could really be anything you want. I think you could get away with using like any sort of opera audition material, right? Like just voice and piano, like you would send in for any sort of like, young artist program screening thing. Like that shows off your voice, even if it's not like, properly recorded. But if you wanted to do something with like this mic or that microphone, and demonstrate that you know how the tech works, record something like a pop song, something that would be close mic'd, right? Versus like opera. You could sing it in a classical style. You could still do that, but practice using your microphones. Figure out how to make it sound good in that context. You could record something you wrote or arranged yourself. this would be a fun way to try out multi-tracking, right? If you arrange some harmonies for your own voice and maybe doing something like soft and Enya-like you can show off how your voice sounds in that sort of a context. If you don't know how to mix something, ask a friend who also wants the practice, or you could pay somebody that, that is friendly with you. If you explain to somebody like, this is a non-commercial thing, it's not going in a game, it's just for my own personal demo reel, a lot of times they'll cut you a deal. They're not going to like break the bank on stuff like that. They know what this is for. It's not going to make you any like immediate money. It's just something that you want to show off. So people will cut you a break on that stuff. And then experiment in new vocal styles that you're not as adept at. Like if you want to have the kind of versatility to do, weird sci-fi alien voice, maybe try covering a similar song from an existing game or movie or something like that and do your own take on it. You don't always need a backing track for all of these, although it does obviously help. I think you could probably do a skill trade with a composer somewhere and say like, hey, I want to put something on my demo reel. I was wondering if you'd want to work on something together. And then that composer has it for their demo reel and you have it for yours, and everybody wins. People are very into doing the sort of skill trade thing in this industry. As long as everybody's on the same page, again, like I'm just using this for my demo reel. I'm just using this for, my YouTube video, whatever. People are very, very open about that. The last question I wanted to address was one of the questions I saw on the spreadsheet that somebody submitted when they signed up for this class. Any misconceptions about the VGM industry you wish aspiring singers knew before trying to break in? The answer is that it is unlikely you'll ever make a living from this full time, but it does not mean that you are unsuccessful. If you look at my resume, it's long. I have a lot of credits on there. I've been very lucky. It is not even remotely enough money to live on. I want to be open about that. It just isn't. There just aren't that many vocal gigs in games. I think the only way you could do this full-time for real is if you had a concert production series like Amanda Aiken has, or like I did with Video Games Live or something like that, where you're touring full-time. And then I question if that's really a games industry thing so much as it is a concert, right? Like you're on a concert production, not so much like making it from game audio specifically. Or if you lived in LA and you were on every composer's list #1 for like every style they needed. It's just so unlikely that anybody would be able to carve out a living just from this. And it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? Like, it's okay to teach on the side. It's fine to have a correlating career. It's fine to also be singing in a choir or assistant music director at a cathedral. Like that, I have multiple part-time jobs that make it feasible for me to be able to work in video games, because if I didn't have those jobs, how am I going to afford to fly out to San Francisco once a year to go to this convention and meet composers? I question if it is possible for anybody to make a living from just this full time. It's more about the spontaneous joy of these gigs coming along and getting to do this cool thing and collaborate with some people that you really like on a project that is well suited to what you do. You know what I mean? That's really where the goal is, I think, in this industry. I joked before, but it really is true. It's really about the friends you make along the way more than like number of gigs you get per year. Because the other thing is the gigs will be inconsistent, even if you work as much as I do. And I do work a lot compared to some other people. I'll get 4 calls in 1 month and then 4 months of no calls at all. If I was just trying to make a living on this, like freelancing 100%, that kind of time would be, catastrophic, right? To be making no income during that time. So I guess I just want to mention that so that nobody thinks that they have to have a resume that has 100 games on it to call themselves a video game vocalist, right? If you sing for 1 game, you did it. You collaborated with something and you made something new. It's the collaboration. It's the interpretation of music that's never been performed before. That's what makes this career so fun. And I hope everybody in this chat room gets to have the experience of that someday, because it really is such a fun place to work. And if I can ever assist you in getting started or answering questions, or if you see me at an event, come up and say hi, because again, this community is so open about that stuff, and I am too. So I love meeting people and helping them get started. So I guess that's the note I want to end on, is that no matter where you go or what you end up doing, I hope you never lose the joy of the pursuit of meeting new people, other, like-minded musicians, and just getting to work with some really cool people and getting to know them. And that's it for me.
Awesome, Laura. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Clapping. Yeah.
Thanks for bearing with me. I'm sorry it went so over time.
No, you're fine. And actually, if you have a few more minutes, I think we have a couple more
I've
questions
got plenty of time, actually. I can stay for as long as you want.
Yeah, we have a couple more in the chat, and then if anyone else has any, you could just raise your hand or type something in the chat, whatever you prefer.
You got it. Let's see. I'm scrolling down. What are the going rates for various gigs? What should we ask for if we are still starting out? Okay, so quick and dirty, I think a fair amount to ask for recording with your own technology, right? Like you are also the recording engineer along with the vocalist. I think 150 an hour is totally fair. And if we're being honest, I think it should be closer to 250. But if somebody is just starting out, 150 an hour. And let me give you a pro tip. If a composer asks you, what's your rate? There's an art to this. There's an art to the haggle. My usual rate is 150 an hour. Let me know if that works with your budget. Let them say no. Don't do the thing where it's like, but I can maybe be flexible. I could knock it down. Let them ask you to knock it down. If they come back to you and say, my max budget is $150, then you get to decide, is this a good music and a good people enough for me to accept this lower amount of money? For me, it usually takes about an hour to record a 5-minute track, depending on the difficulty, and then perhaps another 45 minutes to splice together all of the takes. So I would consider that a 2-hour job. So that's a good baseline to start with when you're looking at the materials that they're providing you with and figuring out how much to ask for. And those numbers would be different if I didn't live in Connecticut, by the way. So like I'm charging Connecticut prices. If you were in LA, I believe the minimum would be $250 an hour. So just keep that in mind based on where you're living. Your prices might vary. Let's see. What does one look for opportunities in this field? I don't find gigs very often on websites. Every now and then on Facebook, I'll see like a composer with whom I'm friends saying, I need this vocalist right now. And I'm not kidding. In 5 minutes, 100 people will have commented on it. So like very rare to get, in above the herd in those moments. But I am not aware of any website that just posts like looking for vocalists for XYZ game. This, here is the rate and so on. I don't think those are really much of a thing. So it's more organic meetings and reaching out. How much of today's music is utilizing live performers to record with the developments of AI and tech effects? So there is a huge schism in video game music. I think most people are on the side of no AI. Like I think most composers and artists are pretty turned off by the idea of their music or artwork being used for an AI, model. So I am sure some developers are very excited about the idea of not having to pay for good art, but most composers are very excited when they get the opportunity to work with a live performer, especially a live singer. I want you to picture a composer for a second. They have been spending 8 hours a day locked in their room talking to nobody and seeing nothing because they're crunching on this game. The idea of getting to work with an outside performer who's going to get to interpret their music and have this wonderful collaborative experience, they are so excited about that for the most part. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, especially for from a purely practical standpoint, the saleability of saying such and such song with this cool vocalist, is a big sell for a video game. Fans get excited about that too. When anything has lyrics, it's like a magic wand. I don't know what happens, but the fans go crazy. And are there studio gigs or is it majority remote? There are studio gigs. It depends on where you live. I think if you lived in LA, the composers would just have you come in. But if you live somewhere else, they're assuming that you're probably going to record remote. There are studios out there, but I just think after COVID, everybody's moving to this remote sort of deal and just assuming that you have the technology to do it. Every now and then a developer will pay for you to go into the studio, but I will say that like the first time they might pay you to do that, and then the second time they're like, actually, can we just record this in your home? And then the third time it will be, actually, can you just record this at home? And can you film some background, some footage of you singing for our behind the scenes YouTube video? So they start asking for more while paying you less. And that's something else to look out for when you're working on this. How much practice time do you put in before you record a track? That's a good question. It depends on how much lead time I have. Maybe an hour max. And even then, I might just run through the hard parts. And then, let me rephrase. I'll practice it on my own for like half an hour to an hour. Again, this depends on the length, right? If I had like, 60 minutes of music, this could be a different answer. But if it's a 5-minute track, I'll go through the hard parts. Then I will test it out with the microphone and listen back right away to see, is this working the way I thought it would? And then I might do a little bit more practicing to finesse the parts that I'm struggling with. More often than not, I'm sight reading something, just diving in cold turkey, and then I'll run into a part where there was a snag, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to go back and do that again. I record the whole thing, and then I might practice just that one moment that was tripping me up as I'm going. It's fast turnaround, so there's very rarely time to practice this stuff. Let's see. Just wanted Thank you, Kartik. So he said his buddy is a huge Destiny fan. Yeah, it's the community is awesome. I love all the Destiny folks. How often do you sight read or improv in gigs? Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe 50% of the time. Every now and then, if you work on an anime gig, this isn't video games, but it's video game adjacent. A lot of the same people work on anime. They will hand you this stuff and say, I need this tonight. And it's multi-tracked, SSAA, let's go. At that point, I am sight reading everything, and I will spot check the one thing that I missed, and then it's on to the next track. Usually in those contexts, it's for a choir. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be mixed in with a bunch of other singers. So you don't have to do solo opera aria level performance on that stuff. They just want a big fat sound of all of these singers. You can't not sing well, but it doesn't have to be pitch perfect. So in those cases when it's like, we need this right now, it's kind of like, all right, they're going to get what they're going to get. I don't have time. A lot of games prohibit the use of AI. That is also true, Terry. That's a good point. Do you charge for the practice time? Not exactly. I will charge them the rate based on the difficulty. And maybe that sort of does answer your question, Tommy. If the song is going to be hard, I might charge more money because I know that's going to present me more of a challenge, but I'm not clocking the practice time itself. I don't include that in the hourly rate. I think your rate should include like your level of experience, right? That you can crank something out with minimal practice time. And if you do need practice time on it, then you should raise the amount accordingly. But it has to be really hard for me at this point. Like it has to be something that's like, I don't know, it's up in the stratosphere and really long and prolonged. And I know that not only is that going to take like some practice time, but I also need to take breaks. You can't sing high C's over and over again, right? Like it's going to start to sound different. So I have to factor that in too to my hourly rate. So I think that sort of answers your question. It's not the practice time specifically, it's the difficulty of the music that I'm charging for, which comes back to practice time. Is there a lot of demand for vocal improvisers? Depends. If you're asking like that Mortal Kombat track I played earlier that was just that sort of a thing, for those types of games, like, yeah, you're not getting any sheet music. They're going to send you a reference track and ask you to just go. If you mean improvisation in terms of like jazz performance, that would depend on if there was like a game that had some sort of like, they wanted to do a specifically jazz influence. There was a game, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. It was very Blade Runner inspired, and it had this like super old school film noir soundtrack. And I believe I heard a vocalist in that was like doing like, humming like improv, like jazzy, humming improv and stuff like that. So, But I would say half the time, like, they do not require any improvisation at all. And it's just, I want these notes at this time. So maybe like 50-50. Oh, thank you, Laura. Thanks for coming. I special in medieval modal improv. So that would be an excellent niche thing to put on your demo reel. Holy crap. Like, can you imagine if the next Pentiment game came out and they were like, we want to do something different, but we still want it to be like medieval inspired. Like, oh my God, put that in your reel. That would be so huge. You never know if the perfect opportunity might come around. That's actually a really good point for everybody. If there's something weird or out, I shouldn't say weird. If there's something out of the ordinary that you do, that is absolutely the sort of thing that should go on your reel. That will set you apart. That will make a composer remember you. And then even if they're going to hire you for something like more traditional, like opera singing, they're going to remember you from that medieval modal improv track that they heard and like, oh yeah, they also do opera. I'll just hire Terry again. I liked working with them. You know, it's that simple. It happens that organically in a lot of cases. Did anybody else have questions?
Yeah, any last questions before we call it a day? Oh, we have one more in the chat.
Oh, yes. What do you recommend for singers who don't fit the typical soprano fach? Full lyric, dramatic, and can't really offer vibrato-free singing. That's an excellent question because for let me put it this way. For does anybody remember the year that like Ariana Grande is like I Got One Less Problem Without You song came out and there was like a saxophone instead of a chorus and like the guy whispering, I got one less problem. And then that year, Jason Derulo also released a song that had a saxophone instead of a chorus. And like everybody was doing the saxophone chorus that year. This, I remember noticing this because it was the most, and like in the, late 90s, early 2000s, everybody had acoustic Spanish guitar on their boy bands track. Like this industry ebbs and flows with what it's looking for. Talk dirty to me. I low-key love that song. Let me back up. 2 years ago, every pitch I was asked to sing for was soprano sadly singing lyrics of like a Foo Fighters song for a trailer where like someone's firing a gun in slow motion and the bullets coming out and it's just like my hero, in the background. A year later, I am being asked to do the heaviest vibrato of my life. Like I keep asking like, okay, I think this is too much. I don't know. And then they'll write back and say, no, it's perfect. Do 4 more just like that. Stuff like that. So there are styles that will be in and out of vogue. And like, again, in this past year, I haven't done a single sad soprano singing Foo Fighters song. It might come back 3 years from now for all I know. But I think if you lean into what your vocal type is and what you do well, and you sell it to people, when the right gig comes up, and you're there and you're ready for it. Because again, what I said before is true. There are times that I go without any calls at all because they're hiring different singers for their projects, because their projects need that kind of voice this time. It's not that I'm bad. It's not that they don't like me. It's just not the right project for me at that time. And that goes back to like, don't try to make this your full-time career unless you live in LA or you're singing for Final Fantasy 14. Wait for the right projects to come along and go find those composers that write these hugely operatic soundtracks. If there's like, I will say a lot of them tend to be for Japanese games. They really like that sound for some reason. And I don't have any connections to the Japanese audio industry, really. I know mostly Americans and European folks, but there are people out there that write for these types of games. Look for those composers, those soundtracks, write to those composers, say, hey, I really love your sound. I sing a lot of this type of music. Any chance you're going to be at Game Sound Con this year? Stuff like that. Super organic. It's a genuine connection because you've listened to their music and you understand, you recognize your voice in their musical voice. And it might be 7 or 8 years down the line, or it might be tomorrow that they're like, oh my God, I have the perfect gig to work with this singer. Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Seriously though, Kartik. Awesome. Any other questions?
Not a question on my part, but I just wanted to say I went over to the YouTube page for High School Love, and according to the comments, this has been in the last 2 mainline Tekken games, and people have set them to as their primary thing for stages. So yes, 2 characters. So that song has played over 2 characters beating the absolute crap out of one another.
My legacy
I
lives
thought
on.
You might like to know that.
I'm so thrilled that my first singing gig had so much longevity.
There were even people that wanted it in Smash when Kazuyo was announced too. Apparently, it didn't make it, unfortunately, but everyone loves it. There's like over 300 comments going, "Oh my God, this song is amazing."
Thank you. I appreciate your support. I still can't believe it happened.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, let's thank Laura again. This has been wonderful and very informative. And everyone, thank you so much for attending. We have lots more BSR workshops coming up this year, so you can check our website, join our mailing list, check us out we have a link tree. We're on Facebook and Instagram. So follow us on all of those things. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, BSR.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.